welcome to session 2. So this is all going to be about the major roads network, the subnational transport bodies, all of these, well, seemingly relatively new things that are suddenly becoming very powerful. And remember, we were basically announcing the major roads network as an idea last year, and I was just talking to Tricia about it, and that's, just less than a year. It's happening, so quite incredible pace of change. And we'll be looking at the infrastructure investment strategy as well, and getting a perspective from Scotland about how things are done in Scotland, where they don't quite have the luxury of these 5-year tranches of money that we're getting down here, but are still doing some good work there as well. So I'll introduce everyone that we've got talking for you, then everyone will give their talk, and after that we'll have the panel discussion. We've got microphones roaming around if you have a question, and put your hand up and you can ask one of these guys a question. So first of all, just to introduce who we've got. We've got Tricia Hayes, Director General of Roads, Devolution and Motoring at the DFT. Hugh Gillis, who's Director of Trunk Roads and Bus Operations at Transport Scotland. Rupert Clubb, who's Director of Communities, Economy and Transport at East Sussex County Council, and the immediate past President of ADEPT. And Councillor Martin Tett, leader of Buckinghamshire County Council and the chair of England's Economic Heartland, one of these transport bodies we're talking about. So please give them a warm welcome. Okay, let's hear from our first speaker now. Tricia, you're up.
So good morning, everybody. It's really nice to be back at Highways UK, to the third Highways UK. And what a fantastic program there are over the next couple of days. It looks at least kind of double the size of the program last year. Really interesting day. It really doesn't seem like a year since I stood in this very room and looked out at a sea of middle-aged male white faces and complained about the lack of diversity in the transport sector. And as the only female speaker in this room today, things haven't moved on all that lot, so try harder, ladies. Carrie Dolan, I'm talking to you. Hope Hadfield, I'm talking to you. Do better. I'd like to see a few more of you next year up here as well as down there. Anyway, you've asked me to come here today to talk about two things. One is progress with subnational transport bodies, and one is the MRN a year on. Excellent topics. I've got lots to say about both of them. But there are just a few other things I thought it would be worth reflecting on, as you'd been kind enough to give me 20 minutes to talk to you. So it's been a lively old year, hasn't it? I don't think that when I came here last year, I would have anticipated that 6 months later we would be having a general election, that we'd be working for a minority government. Lots and lots of change, lots and lots of politics, Brexit, lots going on. But actually, doing the job that I do, working as the person who does roads in the Department for Transport, it's been quite a lot of continuity, really. We still have many of the same ministers as we had a year ago. We're still being asked to do many of the same things that we were being asked to do a year ago. And actually, in terms of the job of making transport better for people who live and work in this country, it's kind of business as usual for us. One change that there has been, though, at a political level in the last year is, compared to when I was here before, we now have a single junior minister who looks after not just strategic roads, but local roads as well. And I think organisationally, there's nothing as interesting, is there, as being talked about other people's organisational change. It's so fun, isn't it? But I think for us and for you, that's been quite a positive change. Because in Jessie Norman's portfolio, we now have a set of responsibilities which allow us to think about not just what are the priorities within the Strategic Roads Programme or within the Local Roads Programme, but also across the Strategic Roads Programme and the Local Roads Programme in a place-intelligent way. And I think that's a really good change from our perspective, and has been really, really helpful as we've been doing work particularly on the major roads network, which I will get on to talk about in a moment. In terms of the practical stuff, the stuff we've been delivering, again, very lively year. I've been knocking around the roads world for more years than I care to remember. And if you're like me, a bit of an old-timer, You too will have been absolutely delighted by the announcement we made in September about the A303 going into tunnel around Stonehenge. We've had a few goes at this over the years, haven't we? It's not the first try, but I honestly believe this time we're going to build the damn thing. It's going to be great. And if you'd said to me even a year ago that we would have a proposition which had explicit public support from the National Trust and English Heritage, I would have been really pleased about that, and I'm still really pleased about that. And like most important road schemes, I think it would be a mistake to think about Stonehenge just about the concrete, about the asphalt. Actually, this isn't just a scheme about cars. It's a scheme about growth. It's a scheme about housing. It will support 120,000 jobs and 100,000 homes across the region, a big change in place. And more generally, one of the things I've seen in the last year is a closer alignment between housing on one hand and transport on the other. During my first 18 months in this job, we've set up a joint team with Department of Communities and Local Government with a joint program aimed at improving integration between housing and transport planning. And I think people are always surprised how difficult this is. In fact, I think if you asked an average tax-paying member of the public whether, when we're thinking about where we're going to build a road or when we're going to think about where we're going to put houses, that we plan the roads around the houses and we plan the houses around the roads, they would probably think that we always do that already, and we always have. And actually, it's, as Martin and others know very well, it's not quite as simple as that. And there's a huge amount of effort needed at national government and at local government level to make it work at a practical level. So the new structures that we've put in place should help us make practical progress in aligning these decision-making process. And we're building some good examples from elsewhere in the transport sector. There are locally owned growth strategies being produced alongside High Speed 2. And there's no reason why we shouldn't take that kind of approach to the biggest schemes in the roads portfolio, such as the Lower Thames Crossing, which again took a big step forward this year in April when we announced our preferred corridor. So at a conference like this, with all the amazing exhibitions out there, the stands, the Lego, the treadmill, I'm really looking forward to having a go on the treadmill later on. Not really. I think I'm more likely to go for the Lego than the treadmill. So we do find ourselves always talking about the stuff, don't we? It's always about the stuff. I just want to take a couple of minutes to kind of have a moment of reflection on the people using the stuff. And I think more this year than ever before, I think we're having a point of reflection on our principal duty here as public servants, which is our duty of care towards the people who use the networks that we fund. And this is something we've been thinking about a lot, particularly in the wake of the Grenfell Tower tragedy. We've just published our most recent set of road safety data covering the year to June, and that data has kind of confirmed, I think, something that we already knew, which is that we're facing some pretty serious challenges right now in retaining the downward trend in fatalities on road networks that we've kind of come to expect over the last 15, 20 years. Despite all the things we've done, we've still got 1,700 people on our roads who are dying. And as traffic continues to rise, it went up 1.4% in the last year, we're going to have to focus real attention on the hard-to-reach targets, whether they're mobile phone users or newly qualified drivers or drink drivers or whoever. So Jesse Norman's asked us to do a bit of work on this. In the short term, looking with a piece on sanctions against dangerous cycling, and then moving on next year, something which is broader based, looking at the relationships between the different kinds of people who use our roads. We're also putting new vigor behind our Think campaign. Our Think campaign has to work much harder than when I first started managing it, which is about 15 years ago. When I first became associated with Think, if you wanted to get a thing done, pretty much you bought a 30-second advertising slot in Coronation Street, and you could be pretty confident that everybody would see the message you were trying to deliver. The world's a bit more complicated now. We're trying to get in touch with audiences that don't all watch television, and some have ad blockers on their spam filters. So we're having to be more creative. And certainly my personal domestic focus group of the 3 teenage sons who live in my house have been quite impressed by our recent efforts. The Hunt the Pink Kittens campaign. If you haven't seen it, have a look at it. #PinkKittens, okay? I can see you all going for your phones right now. And I think this is exactly the kind of creative thinking, the kind of really targeted communication that we need to get to those hard-to-reach groups. So back on to the stuff. And again, interesting moment to be having this conversation with you, because as I know Jim O'Sullivan said in here about an hour and a half ago, we are almost exactly at the halfway point in the roads investment strategy. And I won't repeat what Jim had to say, but I think I share his overall message, which is, so far, so good. And we're also at a critical point in getting organized for the second roads investment strategy, which is being developed through a three-stage process: research, decision, mobilization. So as of today, November 2017, research is almost done. And that doesn't just mean research in the traditional DFT model of nerdy people sitting in a room thinking very clever thoughts. It's research in the model of getting out, talking to you, working with you, trying to understand what you think is important for our road network. The next stage in our process will be a consultation, which we're expecting to put out before Christmas. And this will consult both on the delivery priorities for the network, but also, and I think this is just as important, on the performance standards for our network. We need to know what we're buying with all our money. And I would encourage all of you to put aside the time to get involved in that consultation. There will be lots of channels available to you, lots of ways of getting involved. Really encourage you to use all of them. We have a bit more time in doing the second roads investment strategy than we had when we were doing the first one. And it's going to be a different kind of animal from the first one in a number of ways. And the question of what does a good 5-year program look like is one that's been consuming us quite a lot, not just for roads, but for rail as well. And I guess there's a danger here, and this danger was pointed out to us this year by the National Audit Office, of being a bit overconfident that with an awful lot more time to develop it and a slightly better process, we're going to be able to know absolutely everything we're going to do over a 5-year period. I think that's not realistic. 5 years is a really long time. You find out things about schemes when you develop them. You find out things about the world when you're developing schemes. And you have to have a little bit of flexibility to adjust your plans as you go along. But I do think that the time we've had up front, the engagement we've had up front, and the detailed technical work we use will bring these kind of changes within much more manageable parameters. The other big change we've seen from RIS1 to RIS2 has been the emergence of subnational transport bodies, and this was one of the two topics that you asked me to have a word about. And again, from our perspective, a really good thing. Transport does just work at a regional level as well as at a local level and a national level. And it's really positive that we now have bodies that we can talk to give us that pan-regional perspective. Back in the summer, ministers agreed that Transport for the North should now move forward to statutory status, reflecting its increasingly important role in providing a pan-regional perspective. We've made very good progress over the summer and autumn in developing secondary legislation to do that. And with a fair wind, with a bit of parliamentary time, we should be able to bring that into effect within a matter of weeks. So, within a matter of weeks, that's a kind of a civil service code that you use when you want to avoid committing to a particular date or making a promise that you're expected to keep. But as bits of civil service code go, it's not the worst. It's not all, though, been about Transport for the North this year. As you'll hear from the panel later on, we've now got strong work happening in the Midlands with England's economic heartland. And Rupert will talk about the work about establishing Transport for the South East, initially as a cooperative body, but tasked clearly with strengthening long-term planning in the region. And one of the questions that people ask me most often about these emergent bodies is, do I think that they all need to be the same? And do I think that everywhere in the country needs to be part of one body or another? I think I'm pretty clear about that. There are, if you want to be a subnational transport body with statutory status under the Infrastructure Act, there are some things you need to have, like a strategic transport plan. But if you're not seeking statutory status, and beyond these minimum requirements, these bodies belong to the organizations that participate in them, that create them. And it's fine to us if they may want to go about doing things in some quite different ways. A good example where subnational transport bodies are attacking a task in quite different ways is the last thing you've asked me to talk about today, which is progress with the major road network. And it's really good to see Phil and David here today, just as they were last year when we talked about this for the first time. In fact, my recollection of last year's conference and of standing here a year ago is that the MRN, isn't it great? Another 3-letter acronym, just what we need in the transport sector. Anyway, last year's conference, the MRN was absolutely the hot topic of the whole event. It was what everybody was talking about everywhere we went. We just had the Rees-Jeffries report. We were hearing from David and from Phil about the analysis contained in it. And at that point, although we're normally quite cautious, we were able to say, I think there was a strong consensus at a political as well as an official level that the basic diagnostic in the report had authority and was convincing. So we've made really good progress on this since last year's conference. Over the summer, the government published its transport investment strategy, in which we made a formal commitment that we would support the development of a major road network, talked a little bit about the approach we would take, and promised a consultation on policy design before the end of this year. And Carrie Dolan, who's sitting in the front row from my team, has been working with her team to prepare that consultation and to design the policy to underpin it. And it's been really, really good work. So obviously, we've not published it yet. And today, I'm not going to make any very, very exciting announcements about what it's going to say. But I am going to tease you a little bit about the approach in the consultation. And I'm also going to warn you of 2 really specific elephant traps I would like you to be aware of as you move forward into the consultation period. So the teaser is that we're going to set out in our consultation our high-level objectives for the network. These won't surprise you. They're around congestion, economic growth, rebalancing, housing, and integration with the strategic road network. We're going to set out a set of principles for developing this network and the processes that we're going to adopt in deciding how to allocate funding to individual bits of it. We'll be taking some steps on a long-term journey towards a network which isn't part of the Highways England run strategic road network, but is coordinated with it and integrated with it in an operational way as far as possible. Now, in terms of the definition of the network, again, this is a subject that's been hotly debated over the last year. I think what we're likely to do in our consultation, although we're still working on it, is to kind of say, okay, we had some strong work done by Rees-Jeffries a year ago. Let's take that as our starter for 10 and see whether it works. Now, as you may know, over the last year, individual subnational transport bodies have been doing a lot of work on defining their own major road networks. And I think that's great. I can see many, many reasons why having a locally owned, regionally defined major road network can perform a whole wide range of different useful functions, planning investment, setting operating protocols, whatever. However, for our MRN exercise, and for us to decide how we're going to allocate some central government funding to a strategically important network, we're going to have to look for something which is a bit more streamlined and standardized than just joining together all the regional networks and seeing what they look like. We're going to have some criteria which are a bit more consistent than that. So I'm not saying we're going to set a very precise formula, and we'll certainly be open for arguments about where we've got it wrong or where there are particular roads that are important and we've just missed them. But this is a case where we can't entirely let 1,000 flowers bloom, or we won't be able to take sensible decisions. The second elephant trap I wanted to warn you about is on scale of the kind of schemes that we're going to support in the MRN. So we're in the MRN for the long term. It's a marathon, kind of not a sprint. And there's been lots of speculation about exactly how much money might be available for it and when, and some very big numbers being talked about. I think that points both to a degree of discipline in network definition, of ensuring that we focus absolutely on the most important roads, but also discipline in not coming in upfront with a small number of very big schemes. That's going to, however much money we end up getting, that's going to eat it all up before we even get started. So we need to hit a sweet spot, schemes that are big enough to make a difference, but not so big that there won't be enough to have a reasonably good geographical spread before we start. So those are my 2 taster questions for the forthcoming consultation on the MRN. As with the strategic roads consultation, I would encourage you to get involved, express views, tell us where you think we've got it wrong. And I hope at the end of all this, when you've done all that, you'll invite me back next year. I haven't the faintest idea what you'll want to ask me to talk about. If I was guessing, I would imagine I will be standing here saying perhaps a little bit more about Brexit than I have this year. I don't think I'll manage to say quite as little about Brexit next year as I have this year. But please don't let it put you off. Please invite me back anyway, and look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.
Thanks, Tricia. You talk about the pace of change. The last time I was filming Stonehenge, freezing cold, just before Christmas, I think, I was interviewing Nick Clegg and David Cameron about it. Whatever happened to them? Yeah, exactly. We're going to get a perspective from Scotland now, where they don't have a Highways England, obviously, and the same kind of guarantees with funding, but there's a lot of similar problems, I think, as well. So please welcome Director of Trunk Roads and Bus Operations from Transport Scotland, Hugh Gillis.
Good morning. My first time here. Enjoying it so far. Been very interesting. I've enjoyed listening to Lord Adonis and to Jim O'Sullivan and other speakers this morning. And I'm going to give you a bit of a take in Scotland. And already there's a lot of common features I'm hearing through about things like asset management, investment programs, etc. But there is going to be a slightly different take from my point of view. I was coming down the train yesterday, and I obviously, I've got to start with sticking on the Queensferry crossing. Obviously very proud of that. Proud of that not only from a Transport Scotland point of view, proud of that from a Scottish engineering perspective, from a professional right through to the guys in the tools and the women in the tools. But actually, when I was looking at it, I realised this picture was telling more than I could put in 1,000 words about where are we in transport in Scotland, and you hear these common themes, and I'll try to put some context around that. But you still look at that photograph, clearly you have the 3 bridges there over the 3 centuries, the 1.3 billion Queensferry crossing opened at the end of August, the Forth Road Bridge, and the Forth Bridge. But what it actually tells you as well that it's now multimodal. Now, yeah, you might say, yeah, Hugh, it was multimodal before. You could walk, cycle, run, drive, etc. But the difference here, we're changing road space, reallocating road space. The Forth Road Bridge now is exclusively a public transport corridor for bus. It's also about resilience challenges. One of the main reasons that the Queensferry crossing was brought forward is because the Forth Road Bridge had some serious challenges during high winds, and we just couldn't bring that, and we've heard it already, journey time reliability that people were seeking. It's further enhancing connectivity between Fife and Edinburgh and their larger economies. It's about asset management. The Forth Road Bridge, we've put off a lot of critical interventions and maintenance because we were waiting for the opportunity for Queensferry Crossing to open, and now we've got that opportunity to go and spend the money we've been putting off and replacing, for example, the major joints and other components. It's about the use of new technology and managed motorways, HERIX systems for speed, etc., journey time information. And another one, which maybe not spoken about so much, it's also a tourism opportunity. The Forth Bridge has World Heritage status, something you've really got to work to get and you cherish and you must keep. So there's an opportunity with these 3 bridges to promote this part of Scotland as a destination. People will come and look at these. People already do come and look at these 2 bridges, now 3 bridges. And we aim to capitalise on that the way that they've done, for example, in Sydney Harbour Bridge. And elsewhere, you've got the Rosyth cruise terminal nearby as well. So there are tourism opportunities. And I'll try to put context into why I'm raising these things as we go along the way. Transport Scotland, for those who don't know, is a national transport agency for Scotland. And obviously that means we are a trunk road authority. But it means we cover all modes, whether these are reserved or devolved. Obviously devolved, in my case, being the trunk road, but reserved, which is with the UK government. We're interested in that because we're interested in route development, what that means for business connectivity and tourism. But probably the bit that hinges for me about maybe where the difference is with what I've heard so far is around the document which has the First Minister on it is the programme for government, for the Scottish Government that's recently newly elected. And they've obviously had a mandate in terms of sustainable economic growth, but the First Minister has been much bolder this summer in terms of what her aspirations are, and much of that impacts on transport, on climate change, on air quality, low emission zones, on active travel, and the move towards low emission vehicles. All of these things will, yes, they'll impact on promoting economic growth because transport's an enabler, but it'll also impact on health and social inclusion and addressing transport poverty. And for us within Transport Scotland, that's been one of the main steers for us in developing and publishing our corporate plan, which obviously looks to the government's programme for government. I want to talk about the growth sectors. And why am I mentioning that? Well, again, what's different for us has been sort of the post-referendums landscape, if you will, and finances. Most of you will be familiar with the Barnett formula, how the UK administrations have been funded traditionally, but the equilibrium has been changed, and there's an onus on us as the Scottish Government to raise much more of our revenue at home rather than have it block granted to us. So it means we've got to get more out of traditional industries and growth industries such as food and drink and tourism, and that means getting people into the country and getting them to be able to move about as seamlessly as possible across all modes. For me, obviously being the director for the trunk road and bus operations, but the trunk road, if you take anything just from that graphic, it's just how diverse the trunk road is. Obviously, in many ways, for those who live in the Highlands or the Fleece and Galloway and the borders, the trunk road is literally the lifeline service. But obviously in the central belt, we've got the motorway systems, etc. So it's a very diverse network to maintain and operate on a daily basis, as well as all these other factors about making sure that we deliver for Scotland's economy. Heard a lot about road safety, and it was clear that it's still the number one priority for the Highways Agency, and we've heard obviously from DFT it's a big thing as well. It remains a big thing. It's first in our thoughts, and rightly it should be. Our citizens should not be dying on our roads. It's just unacceptable. But for the last 10 years, we've been on a journey into our road safety targets, and we're making progress. But there are still deaths happening on our roads, and we need to do more. And recently, we brought in our third long-distance average speed camera scheme between Aberdeen and Dundee, or more specifically from Stonehaven to Dundee. It was only switched on last week. And we've done it because we know these things work. There's a lot of people against average speed cameras. I know there was a thing over the weekend about so many speed cameras not working, but really what the headline should have been is, why do we need speed cameras in the first place, rather than how many are actually switched on? But that's another debate with the printed press. But the other thing, of course, again, going back to journey time reliability, when a fatal accident happens on our roads, and I know it happened on roads right around the United Kingdom, the road has to be closed. It becomes an accident scene. The primary agency is the police. So the road can be closed between 4 to 5 hours, and the disruption that brings. So if you can reduce the number of people getting killed, you're obviously keeping your roads open as well. We know that the average speed cameras on the A9 have delivered probably around 30 to 40% reduction in killed and seriously injured casualties, which clearly got to be a good thing. The next one I want to talk about is resilience in two senses and weather challenges. Obviously, if you're the director of trunk roads in Scotland and winter comes along, you always get a few emails from the minister to say, are we ready? Yes, Minister, touching lots of wood, we are ready. And we've got lots of salt, etc., etc. But it's a serious point. Actually, since the winter of 2010, we've not had really snowy winters, but what we've had, which you've had here in England as well, is heavy flooding and high winds, and they are equally disruptive. And obviously that breaks down journey time reliability, and I've talked about these lifeline aspects. But as ever, we try to plan, respond, and recover as quickly as possible. And at the heart of that is the trunk road, because at the end of the day, everybody's default position is if they can't fly, they can't get a ferry or whatever, they put on a bus replacement, and they need to go on the trunk road network. So that needs to be there first to allow that to happen. The other resilience point I would like to mention is counter-terrorism. Sadly, that's becoming more and more of a feature in all of our lives. and we had the move to critical following the Manchester atrocity. And the trunk road network, and indeed all other networks and modes, are clearly getting involved in that. And that's something we have to keep an eye on how we go about responding to these things. Next one, also been mentioned, asset management. Money is scarce. We've been okay, actually. Could I take more money from the Cabinet Secretary for Finance? Yes, I could. Could the supply chain, as it presently stands, be able to respond to it? If I got a big bag of money, probably no, it couldn't, because we heard from Sika this morning, but we need to get to a place where it's that virtuous upward spiral of tackling the backlog in our asset condition, and that's what we plan to do, and we're doing that through our road asset management plan, our RAMP. So when we do get money in, we spend it wisely where it's best to go. But again, I recognize the comments around road space. We too have a challenge. As you get more money, or you need to go in and close roads, and the reliance on roads, people aren't happy. They want nice roads, but they don't want them closed. So you're constantly getting pulled in either direction. It's something we too plan to do more work on in terms of customer engagement, because that's the place that we need to be. There's no doubt about that. Just a couple more from me. The next one is on technology. Last week, we launched our new 10-year strategy for ITS. We'd just come to the end of the previous ITS 10-year cycle. And I challenged the guys in my team to look at it on 3 fronts. I wanted them to look at the strategy from a fiscal sense, because obviously we talk about fiscal cycles, from a policy sense, because obviously governments can change in a 10-year cycle. I wanted it to be relevant and fresh and stay in that place. And also probably the third one was recognizing just the sheer pace of technology change. Governments cannot outsprint Google, TomTom, Tesla. It's just not going to be possible to do that. So we have to get into a place where we can make our peace with these new technologies. It's customer-driven, but obviously they're on our roads, and we need to understand how we can get the best out of that, but not being overwhelmed by it. Quite a challenge. I also mentioned air quality and climate change. The Scottish Government set out very, very ambitious targets for 2032 for 66% reduction in climate change emissions. Transport is the major contributor to all of these things, to the climate change emissions. So we'll need to be in that space. We'll need to work about low-emission vehicles and to understand how we can, for example, put more charging points around the country. We've announced that the A9 will hopefully become the first electric highway in Scotland as that's rolled out. But a close cousin of all that is obviously air quality, and we've announced that Glasgow will be the first low-emission centre in Scotland in 2018, with the 3 remaining large cities to be in place by 2020. That is a massive challenge. I was talking to an old colleague of mine I hadn't seen for a few years, and we could spend the rest of the day talking about the interdependencies of the transport system and air quality and what will mean for the vibrancies of your cities, the impacts in your cities, the impacts in the bus industry. Bus is part of the solution, not part of the problem. I could go on and on and on. You can tell what's filled my year. You talk about what's filled your. That's what's filled my year, has been LAZs. And then finally, policy development. Richard had mentioned that we don't obviously have RIS or RIS2, but we do have the strategic projects review, which we've got to the end of the 10-year cycle. The culmination was the flagship Queensferry Crossing. But what do we build next? But that will be guided by the National Transport Strategy. I've talked about all these ambitious aspects of Scottish Government around the programme for government. But I actually like the infographic, which I've nicked from my policy colleagues right in the middle of that. Because what I like about that little graphic is there's a road all the way through that. So whilst policies will change and strategy will change and fiscal policy will change, the road network will still be there. We'll just use it differently. Thank you.